Introduced in the year 20 BBY, the Eta-2 Actis-class interceptor was a successor to the earlier Delta 7 Jedi Starfighter. Although not specifically designed for the Jedi, they used these nimble little starfighters to great effect during the Clone Wars. Join me in this video as I build and review the Revell 1/58 scale plastic model kit of Obi-Wan Kenobi's personal starfighter. Hi, I'm Matt and you're watching Model Minutes. This model was chosen by you, the community, following a recent poll on my channel. Thanks to everyone who took part in the vote. Before I start the video, a quick shout out to my patron. From as little as $1 a month, you can help support the channel and ensure the creation of bigger and better content, whilst also receiving additional and exclusive perks. Thanks for your support. Before I start the kit, as always, please remember that adult supervision may be required due to the use of sharp paints and toxic chemicals. Revell recommends this kit to those aged 10 years and over. The front of the box features the familiar colour scheme of this particular line of kits from Revell. An image of the starfighter in combat over a planet takes centre stage, whilst the skill level and scale information is also present. Revell denotes this kit as a skill level 3. The rear of the box features multilingual information about the kit, as well as some images of the finished model and unstarted sprues. The recommended Revell paints are also listed, but I will be opting to use different ones that closely match the colours. Taking a look inside the box, the first thing I investigate are the decals. There are not many included in the kit, but those that are present are well printed and are to the normal standard from Revell. The instructions come as a glossy A4 booklet with a large image of the finished kit on the front. The step-by-step diagrams are easy to follow and all paint and decal placement instructions are present throughout the steps. Inside a plastic bag you'll find the 5 sprues, which hold the 21 parts of the kit. 4 are moulded in grey plastic, whilst a clear one holds the cockpit canopies. The components are well moulded, with no flash being present, and raised details and recessed panel lines are well represented on the various parts. The kit even features a reasonable representation of Obi-Wan Kenobi and his astromech droid R4-P17. The first step was to give all the plastic parts their normal wash in warm soapy water. This will help remove any oil or grease that may be present on the kit and should give a good surface for paint and cement to stick to. I then left these parts to air dry. I start the construction by removing the parts for the cockpit, including the pilot and chair, from their respective sprues and removing any excess or unwanted plastic with a nail file. I painted various internal parts with Humbrol 78 Acrylic Cockpit Green and 29 Matte Earth. Here you can see me painting the clothing of the pilot. I used Humbrol 34 Matte White for Obi-Wan's robes, ensuring to avoid placing any on the already painted areas. Humbrol 73 Matte Wine Enamel was used to pick out his boots. A few coats were needed as the paint was quite thin. This paint was then used to also highlight various controls inside the cockpit. Humbrol 61 Matte Flesh was used to pick out the hands and face of the pilot. I took great care using a fine brush for this step. Next, Citadel Non Oil Black Wash was used to highlight the details on all of the previously painted parts. It was brushed over the components and left to dry. I then began to assemble the cockpit by adding the seat, pilot and rear bulkhead. I'm using Tamiya extra thin cement throughout this build as it has good flow and bonding qualities and can be applied accurately with the included brush. The cockpit pod was then assembled using the same process of removing the components from the sprue and cleaning up with a nail file or knife. They were then cemented together and the previously completed parts added to the assembly. The fit of the parts is quite good and in some places seem to just click together. But despite this, I'd still recommend using cement to ensure that they remain in place. I highlighted some of the details on the internal walls of the cockpit using Humbrol 33 Matte Black Acrylic. I then used Humbrol 106 Matte Ocean Grey acrylic paint on the cockpit canopy frames. A decal is included for the small circular window at the front of the craft, but I decided to instead paint the frames so that it would be uniform with the rest of the model. I used a fine paintbrush and took care to follow the details in order to avoid placing the paint in the incorrect places. These clear parts were then removed from their sprues, cleaned up and added to the cockpit assembly. This did take a little bit of work to get right. The two sides of the cockpit sandwich the canopy and hold it in place, but it can be difficult to get the alignment just right and avoid leaving any gaps. With a little patience, I managed to persevere. You'll be able to notice that at this point I've already painted the red areas of the spaceship with Humbrol 73 matte wine enamel, but I'm not entirely happy with it, so I will go back over it with another layer of paint later. Before that though, I start to remove the upper and lower wing halves and cement them together. The wings are then added to the cockpit pod in the correct holes and held in place until set. The S-foils on the wings are simply added to their slots and cemented in place. It's worth noting that they only come in the attack position and cannot be displayed in the closed position without considerable modification and cutting of the parts. At this stage I'm mixing Humbrol 60 matte scarlet acrylic with a little Humbrol 33 matte black and thinning the paint down with Tamiya acrylic thinner. I did this by eye until I reached a good representation of the scarlet colour as depicted on the box. I then used a fine paintbrush to go over the already painted red areas of the model. Next, I painted the internal sides of the S-foils with Humbrol matte black number 33, taking care to follow the moulded lines. This step would have been easier, being completed before adding the parts to the model. I also used this paint to highlight the blasters on the wings and the engine nozzles which were still on the sprues. I then thinned Humbrol 106 Ocean Grey matte acrylic with Tamiya acrylic thinners and proceeded to paint the grey areas of the model with a fine paintbrush, taking care to avoid the already painted red parts. I thinned the paint to help avoid leaving any brush strokes. Having already painted the red areas of the astromech droid, I then moved on to paint the more yellow areas with Humbrol 103 matte cream acrylic using a fine paint brush. This was quite a fiddly step, so care must be taken here. The engine nozzles were then removed from the sprue and cemented into the correct holes on the rear of the model. This was then followed by the addition of the astromech droid into its slot on the port wing. Humbrol 135 Satin Varnish acrylic was then thinned and painted over the entire model, but not the clear unpainted glass parts. This satin varnish will form the base layer for the decals and help prevent them from silvering during application. The decals were cut into more manageable pieces and then soaked in warm water to allow them to come away from the backing paper. They were then carefully applied to the model in the correct locations, and a coat of Humbrol decal fix was used to help soften them into the surface details. When the decals had been applied and left to cure overnight, the model was given a coat of Humbrol 49 matte enamel paint, which I had pre-thinned with white spirit. This will help give the model a uniform paint finish and help blend the decals into the paint scheme and appear as if they are painted on. This enamel layer will also help protect the previous acrylic layers in the next steps. Humbrol 53 gunmetal grey acrylic was used to quickly pick out some of the detailing I'd missed on the wings. Again, I used a fine brush and took care to not get it in the wrong places. Citadel Known Oil Black Acrylic Wash was then applied to the panel lines on the entire model to help bring out the details. When the wash was dry, I removed the excess with a cotton bud dipped in Tamiya acrylic thinner. I attempted to brush this off in the same direction, which would help highlight the weathering effect. I dry brushed Humbrol 33 matte black acrylic in the areas around the blasters in an attempt to make it look as if they had been in use, leaving scorched areas and staining. The final step was to use Humbrol Metal Coat aluminium paint to simulate some chipped paintwork and represent the bare metal underneath. I did this in any areas that might be subject to maintenance, moving parts, or damage. And that's as far as I went with my build of the Revell Obi-Wan Jedi Starfighter in 1/58 scale. I think that this is a great little kit with good detail and a relatively easy assembly, which would make it great for a beginner, especially as the paint scheme is not particularly complicated. My only concern is that Revell doesn't seem to have any consistency with the scales of its Star Wars line of kits, which makes displaying them together or as part of a diorama very difficult to do. This kit dates from around 2016, so it's not particularly old, and is based off of the slightly earlier version depicting Anakin Skywalker's personal Eta-2 ship, but with the pilot figure and paint scheme being changed. These versions are based off of the earlier 2007 Easy Kit offering from Revell, where the parts were virtually identical but came pre-painted. So, in conclusion, I think that this is a great representation of the interesting little starfighter that made its on-screen debut in the Revenge of the Sith prequel film. It would make an interesting addition to any collection, but is let down by the odd scaling that Revell have chosen to use in comparison to the other kits in the range. Retailing for around £6 in the UK at the time of this video, I think that it is a fair price for this well-detailed and fun little kit to build. It only took me a couple of days of on and off building to complete, and most of the time was taken up with the paint drying. I'm very happy with the results I've managed to achieve with my 1/58 scale plastic model kit of Obi-Wan Kenobi's Jedi Starfighter from Revell. As always, let me know what you think of my build, techniques and finished model in the comments below, and don't forget that I'm eager to hear your suggestions for kits or videos that I should feature on my channel, so feel free to post that too. All that's left to say is thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again on the workbench next time.